In a Dallas Municipal courtroom, where routine hums beneath flickering lights, Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman and civil rights titan, steps in late, a parking ticket in hand. It's a minor hiccup until Judge Roy Hayes, a man steeped in corruption, slams her with a $500 fine for contempt, his voice dripping with disdain. The air tightens, but Jasmine doesn't bend. What begins as a petty power play spirals into a showdown, as she unveils a mind sharper than the gavel, and evidence that turns his smugness to ash. This is a story of a giant unmasked, a fine flipped into a fall, and a woman who proves justice bows to no one. Jasmin Kroket stepped into courtroom 3B at the Dallas Municipal Courthouse at exactly 9:12 a.m., her presence charged with an urgency born of high stakes and even higher expectations. The air in the corridor was cool yet heavy, with the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the musty scent of time-worn paper, a constant reminder of cases long past and decisions etched in the annals of the city's legal system. Despite the modern glass and metal accents of the courthouse, there lingered an old-world gravity in every step, every whispered conversation between polished, well-dressed clerks and the creaking wood of aged chairs. Jasmine, a renowned congresswoman and fiercely experienced human rights attorney, had arrived 19 minutes late, a delay that might have been fatal for many, but in her case, it was the direct consequence of an urgent call received from her team in Washington. That call confirmed the latest DOJ report on discriminatory evictions in South Dallas, a revelation that had set off alarm bells in her office, demanding immediate action. And yet, there she stood amid the hushed clamor of a courtroom, summoned for what many would consider a trivial matter, a parking ticket incident that occurred during a meeting with housing rights activists. But Jasmine knew that nothing in the fight for justice was ever trivial. The courtroom itself exuded a unique blend of modern sterility and inherited tradition. The polished surfaces glimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights, while the distinct creaks of antique wooden chairs resonated with each shift of movement. Overhead, a near-constant hum from the aging refrigerated fans droned softly in the background, their low pitch almost rhythmic, as if marking the steady passage of time in this bastion of legal authority. The faint rustle of papers, the tapping of keyboards by overworked clerks, and the murmur of legal jargon drifting between hushed voices provided an ambient counterpoint to the palpable tension of the moment. As Jasmine made her way down the aisle, all eyes briefly turned toward her. A mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and thinly veiled disdain directed at the veteran attorney known as much for her indomitable spirit as for her willingness to challenge the status quo. The secretaries and clerks, whose cold gazes rarely deviated from their meticulous routines, exchanged knowing looks. They were all acutely aware of Judge Roy Hayes' notorious reputation. A man whose decision-making was overshadowed by whispers of corruption and racial bias, Hayes had become almost legendary for the way he levied punitive fines and issued curt, unyielding judgments. No sooner had Jasmine slid into a reserved seat near the front, her high heels making a measured click against the marble floor, than the imposing figure of Judge Hayes strode into the courtroom. Clad in a dark, impeccably tailored robe that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, he exuded an aura of imperious authority, a presence that demanded, and frequently received, blind obedience. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the room with an air of disdain as if each spectator were a minor inconvenience in his meticulously controlled domain. Without missing a beat, after a few terse preliminary remarks about the triviality of the matter, Judge Hayes fixed his steely gaze on Jasmine. His voice, deep and unyielding, rang out across the hushed chamber. "Ms. Kroket, your blatant disregard for the rules of this court will cost you a $500 fine for contempt," he thundered, the finality of his words slicing through the soft murmur of the room like a guillotine's swing. The accusation was as public as it was personal, a deliberate, shameful attempt to demean her reputation before everyone present. Almost instantaneously, a ripple of derision spread throughout the courtroom. Low, almost imperceptible chuckles and cynical whispers rose from the back, echoing the sentiment of many who were either complicit in or indifferent to the systemic injustices that plagued the system. Yet, in the midst of this cacophony of scorn, Jasmine's eyes remained unervingly calm. Slowly but deliberately, she lifted one perfectly arched eyebrow, a small, controlled gesture that spoke volumes. That quiet arch was no sign of submission. Rather, it was the poised prelude to a counterattack, the signal of a mind already ticking with legal strategy. In that fleeting, suspended moment, the tension in the courtroom coalesced into a single electric charge. A promise that what had just been launched was only the beginning. Without a trace of hesitation, Jasmine rose from her seat and, standing tall before the gathered crowd, addressed the judge in a measured yet resolute tone. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I respectfully challenge this decision." The courtroom, momentarily stunned into silence by her daring defiance, seemed to hold its collective breath. Every eye turned toward her, from the skeptical clerks to the curious onlookers, while Judge Hayes' narrowed gaze bore into her with a mixture of incredulity and irritation. "Your contempt ruling is not only unjust but emblematic of a deeper malaise that has long plagued this court," she continued, her tone laced with both legal precision and personal conviction. "I have been informed, and my own investigation confirms, that fines of this nature are systematically levied against minority citizens in our community. For the past 3 years alone, data obtained through public records requests indicates that minority defendants have been fined at disproportionately higher rates than their counterparts for similar infractions." Her words rippled through the room. In hushed whispers, the secretaries, local attorneys, and even a few of the spectators exchanged glances that betrayed their own disquiet. Some had observed, too, that Judge Hayes had a reputation for issuing draconian penalties, especially when it came to cases involving housing rights and similar civil matters. The atmosphere, already dense with tension from the earlier rebuke, now thickened further, blending the mustiness of old paper, the lingering aroma of coffee, and that omnipresent hum of the aging HVAC system into a weighty backdrop for her unfolding argument. Jasmine paused, allowing her carefully chosen words to sink in. Then, proceeding with a quiet intensity that belied the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior, she produced a thin folder from within her bespoke leather briefcase. With deliberate grace, she opened it to reveal a meticulously organized set of documents. Among these were statistical reports from the municipal court, clearly showing a consistent pattern. Fines for parking infractions and other minor offenses had been levied in amounts far exceeding those imposed on white citizens. The graphs and tables, each annotated with source references and dates, painted a damning portrait of bias, a systematic practice of overpenalization that had been conditionally sanctioned within this very courtroom. "Furthermore," she asserted, her tone rising slightly as she built her case, "I have here a recording of your own conversation with a fellow court official, in which you, Judge Hayes, boast about taming the unruly and enforcing discipline in ways that border on oppressive." She held up a small, sleek audio device for all to see, its surface glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "This record clearly indicates that you consider these actions not as the imposition of justice, but as a means to intimidate and control," she added, her voice unwavering, eyes locked on the judge's. There was a palpable stir in the room as murmurs of assent or disquiet spread among the spectators. Several clerks who had previously maintained stoic silence now exchanged furtive looks. Even a few of the lawyers in attendance leaned forward, their interest piqued by the strength of her evidence. Judge Hayes, however, responded with a dismissive sneer. "Ms. Kroket, this is highly irregular," he snapped, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your challenge is noted, but this court's procedures are not subject to your personal crusade." For a moment, the tension in the courtroom escalated. The low hum of the ventilation seemed to intensify, and the shot of a neglected clock on the wall reminded everyone that time itself was a witness. Jasper-like focus, masked beneath an aura of controlled indignation, Jasmine did not falter. Instead, she advanced her argument further. "I respectfully invoke the precedent set by the Supreme Court regarding judicial bias. The evidence I have compiled demonstrates that your rulings in cases involving minority defendants are not only inconsistent with due process but are in violation of constitutional rights. I demand that these fines and any related penalties be immediately suspended, pending a full investigation into your conduct." In the ensuing moments, the energy in the courtroom oscillated between disbelief and growing support for her challenge. A local journalist, David Lane, who had been lurking discreetly at the edge of the room, began recording the exchange on his phone, his eyes never leaving the impassioned attorney as she spoke. The words justice and accountability reverberated through the space, and so did the soft, determined echo of her challenge. Judge Hayes' lip curled in a mix of irritation and shock, and he barked out an order with a brusque wave of his hand. "Security! Remove Miss Kroket from these proceedings at once." His voice, intended to silence dissent, instead fanned the flames of contention further, as murmurs of disapproval crescendoed among the audience. Standing firm, Jasmine let her gaze sweep over the room, silently challenging each sneer and doubtful glance. Her posture was rigid with purpose, defying both the immediate threat of removal and the systemic injustice she had so boldly denounced. In this charged moment, as the evidence in her outstretched folder began to visually validate her claims, Jasmine's challenge transformed into a rallying cry for those present. The courtroom, once a sterile chamber echoing routine procedures, was now on the brink of transformation, a place where the entrenched abuses of power were starting to be questioned in the light of truth and accountability. And as the tension thickened to an almost tangible density, the soft whir of the fans merged with the determined beat of hearts, ready to witness justice reborn. Jasmine took a measured breath and, with deliberate precision, reached deeper into her leather briefcase. From inside, she extracted a thick folder containing meticulously compiled statistical records. These weren't just numbers on paper. They were damning evidence that painted a stark picture of systemic injustice. With a controlled gesture that betrayed neither anxiety nor haste, she spread the documents on a nearby podium, projecting the data onto a small monitor mounted on the wall. The figures detailed a clear pattern. Over the last 3 years, fines issued by this very court to minority defendants far exceeded those levied on white citizens for similar offenses. Bar graphs, pie charts, and line graphs, each itemized and sourced, spoke of deliberate overpenalization, and every statistic pulsed with the weight of countless lives affected by this bias. The courtroom's ambient murmur of hushed conversations shifted as every eye fixed on the illuminated data. Clerks, previously detached in their routine, now leaned in, their expressions a mix of disquiet and disbelief. The data was irrefutable, a stark tableau that highlighted that Judge Hayes' punitive actions were not isolated incidents of negligence or misunderstanding, but part of a broader, corrosive practice of discrimination. The tension in the room grew, as if the very air was anchoring a collective realization that the foundations of this institution were far from infallible. Unsatisfied with the numbers alone, Jasmine then produced another critical piece of evidence, a small recording device in its sleek, unassuming casing. With a calm yet deliberate motion, she activated the device. Immediately, the clear, grainy sound of a recorded conversation filled the room. The recording captured Judge Hayes in an off-the-record discussion with a fellow court official. In the hushed, gravelly timbre of his own voice, Hayes could be heard boasting about how he tames the unruly by imposing steep fines, a tactic he casually described as keeping the system in line. Each word from the recording resonated with damning clarity. The judge's callousness laid bare for everyone to hear. The room fell into an eerie silence as the recording played, the voice of Judge Hayes echoing off the walls like the sound of betrayal from within the system itself. The atmosphere became electric with shock and disbelief. Whispers turned into low, fervent discussions. Even a few of the secretaries flinched visibly, realizing that the man they had silently reverenced as an authority figure was now being exposed for his personal vendetta. Some lawyers in the back scribbled notes on their pads, their faces registering that this case was evolving into something far more momentous than a mere parking violation. But the powerful display of evidence did not go unchallenged. The rigid silence was abruptly broken as Judge Hayes' face flushed with anger. With a swift, brusque gesture, he slammed his gavel, its sharp sound slicing through the charged air. "That is enough," he bellowed, his voice now rising in a tone of contempt. "Security! Remove Miss Kroket from this courtroom immediately." His command emanated from a mixture of fury and a desperate need to reclaim control, a reaction that only intensified the sense of injustice hanging over the proceedings. Instantly, A group of court bailiffs advanced toward Jasmine. Their steps were measured, military-like, as they converged on her with professional indifference. But Jasmine's eyes burned with a steely resolve, her posture unyielding despite the imminent threat of force. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The sound of the guard's footsteps merged with the fading remnants of the recording and the last visible hints of the luminous data on the screen. The judge's order, however, had not yet been enforced. The hush that followed was punctuated by the distant ringing of a telephone. A signal, perhaps, that higher authority was being summoned. As the guards hesitated at the threshold of her space, Jasmine maintained her unflinching gaze. The charged silence built into a crescendo of tension as she prepared to respond once more. It was in that suspended moment, on the edge of being forcibly removed from the courtroom, that the faint, urgent ring of a telephone broke through the clamor. The call, emanating from one of the courtroom secretaries, signaled that the senior judge's attention was now being sought. The unfolding drama teetered on the brink. The evidence lay bare, the guards poised to act, and the imminent intervention of a higher authority promising a final turning point in this dramatic confrontation. As the sound of the telephone's ring echoed through the tense silence, the heavy doors to courtroom 3B swung open, and Senior Judge Ellen Ramirez entered with measured authority. Her presence, dignified and resolute, immediately shifted the atmosphere. Dressed in a deep burgundy robe that stood in stark contrast to the sterile light of the room, Judge Ramirez exuded calm but uncompromising power. The murmurs dwindled to a cautious hush, and the faces of everyone present, secretaries, attorneys, and even the covertly recording journalist, turned their attention toward the new arbiter of justice. Judge Ramirez strode to the center of the room, her eyes quickly taking in the scene before her. With a slight nod to the bailiffs, she motioned for silence and then addressed the assembly in a firm, yet compassionate tone. "Let us review all that has transpired." Her words resonated across the marble floors, drawing every eye to the evidence laid out on the podium. Jasmine, still standing tall amidst the lingering threat of removal, carefully gathered her supporting documents and stepped forward. With deliberate clarity, she restated her points. "Your Honor, the evidence shows that for the past 3 years, fines have been disproportionately imposed on minority citizens, and the recording," she gestured toward the still-playing device, "reveals Judge Hayes' own callous language regarding taming the unruly." Judge Ramirez listened intently, her gaze unwavering as she scanned the folder of statistical charts and the audio evidence that now filled the silence in the courtroom. She pressed a button on her tablet, causing a larger display to project the pertinent graphs onto the wall behind Jasmine. The numbers, stark and indisputable, illuminated the systematic injustice long hidden behind procedural routine. The evidence painted a clear picture of prejudice and overzealous fines that had targeted the most vulnerable. "Ms. Crockett," Judge Ramirez began, her voice resonant and measured, "after a cursory review of the evidence presented, it appears that the fine levied by Judge Hayes was not only excessive but grounded in a pattern of judicial bias. I hereby suspend the fine and order a full investigation into the practices of this courtroom." At her pronouncement, an audible gasp traversed the room. The calculated tone in her voice left little room for debate. In the same moment, Judge Ramirez turned her piercing eyes to Judge Hayes, whose face had contorted from arrogance to utter shock. "Judge Hayes," she declared, "your conduct in this matter has raised serious concerns regarding your impartiality and adherence to the principles of justice. Effective immediately, I am ordering your temporary removal from all proceedings while this investigation is conducted." The words seemed to slice through the heavy, oppressive tension that had charged the atmosphere. A palpable silence ensued as the courtroom processed her edict. The bailiffs, acting promptly on her command, advanced toward Judge Hayes. His previously unflappable facade crumbled as he sputtered indignantly, "This is a conspiracy. This is an overreach. I am the authority here." But his protest was swiftly cut off by the determined eyes of Senior Judge Ramirez. "Take him away," she ordered in a tone that brooked no opposition. Within moments, Judge Hayes was escorted from the room amid a flurry of papers and whispered exclamations. The fall of the corrupt judge was both precipitous and breathtaking, a charged reminder to all present that the scales of justice had finally begun to tip toward accountability. The shocked expressions of the courtroom witnesses belied the quiet triumph stirring in their hearts. Even the secretaries, notorious for their detached professionalism, could not help but exchange incredulous glances. The imposing figure they had once cowered before was now being ushered out under the weight of incontrovertible evidence. David Lane, the journalist, captured every moment on his smartphone, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he recorded the surreal scene for posterity. The energy in the hall was transformed from oppressive dread to an electrifying mix of vindication and introspection. For Jasmine, the culmination of her argument, the unveiling of corruption and the decisive intervention of Judge Ramirez, validated not only the evidence she'd meticulously gathered but also her indomitable spirit in the face of systemic injustice. As the door closed behind Judge Hayes and the murmurs of disbelief rose like a swelling tide, the courtroom remained in stunned silence. The air, heavy with the echoes of a fallen regime, now seemed charged with the promise of a new beginning, one where accountability and truth would no longer be sacrificed at the altar of prejudice. Every face in the room, from the anxious clerks to the hardened veteran attorneys, reflected a mix of shock, relief, and a burgeoning hope that the tide of justice might indeed turn. In the days that followed Judge Ramirez's dramatic edict, the atmosphere in Dallas shifted from stunned disbelief to a charged drive for accountability. A full-scale investigation was swiftly launched into the manifold corruption of Judge Hayes. Independent auditors, forensic accountants, and civil rights investigators pored over years of case files, internal memos, and previously hidden recordings. Every document and testimony that surfaced painted a damning portrait of a judge who had wielded his power to target minority citizens under the guise of maintaining order. The evidence Jasmine had so meticulously gathered was just the opening salvo in what appeared to be a decades-long campaign of judicial abuse. The investigation revealed that Hayes had been manipulating fines not only in cases of minor infractions but also in more serious civil matters. Detailed records uncovered that fines in cases involving minority defendants were consistently and inexplicably doubled, or even tripled, compared to similar cases for white defendants. Former court employees, initially too fearful to speak out, began to come forward with oral testimonies and internal emails. One clerk, whose voice trembled as she recounted her experiences, whispered that every day felt like we were part of a system designed to humiliate and suppress those who dared to be different. As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Hayes had used his notorious catchphrase, bragging to colleagues about taming the unruly, as a grim mantra to justify his exploitative practices. Within the municipal court itself, a palpable transformation took place. The same corridors that had echoed with cold indifference now buzzed with the determined conversations of attorneys, activists, and community members demanding reform. Jasmine became the inadvertent leader of this uprising for justice. In a series of follow-up sessions, she presented additional evidence to every panel appointed to review Hayes' decisions. With each meeting, her calm yet incisive arguments dismantled the veneer of legal legitimacy that had long shielded the corrupt practices. In one such session, under the accusatory glare of newly appointed oversight officials, Jasmine detailed how Hayes' decisions often deviated radically from established precedents. "The data do not lie," she stated. "This system was hijacked by prejudice and personal vendetta, and I have every right to demand accountability." Local media soon caught wind of the unfolding saga. David Lane, the vigilant journalist who had captured the initial courtroom confrontation, produced a series of explosive reports that brought the investigation into the spotlight. His footage of Judge Hayes' removal, paired with interviews from former employees and legal scholars, spread across social media like wildfire. In one emotionally charged interview, a veteran lawyer declared, "This is the breaking of a dark chain in our legal system. For too long, judges like Hayes have used their position to enforce discrimination under the guise of law." The growing public outcry combined with the mounting weight of documental proof provided a momentum that no amount of bureaucratic inertia could stall. In closed-door meetings with public officials, several high-ranking members of the Dallas legal community expressed their shock and disappointment. They cited Hayes' actions as emblematic of a broader problem within the local judiciary, one that had quietly eroded faith in justice among marginalized communities. The investigation not only verified the disproportionate penalties levied by Hayes, but also uncovered a network of undue influences, where local political pressures and financial incentives had encouraged such biased rulings. The results of the inquiry were as multifaceted as they were damning, providing a comprehensive account of systematic exploitation and racial injustice. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the state prosecutor's office began considering charges that ranged from corruption to civil rights violations. As details of Hayes' conduct became public, there was a palpable sense of vindication across the city. Workers at the courthouse, whose own quiet suffering under the oppressive atmosphere could no longer be concealed, expressed relief that the long-standing abuse of power was finally under investigation. Community leaders from South Dallas, who had long battled discriminatory practices in the justice system, found new hope in Jasmine's bold stand. In private, Jasmine reflected on the immense cost of her battle. Every sleepless night and every moment of ridicule had led her to this pinnacle of accountability. Though the road ahead remained uncertain and filled with legal battles yet to be fought, she took quiet pride in the fact that justice was beginning to seep back into a system that had forsaken it for too long. Her own determination had ignited a spark in the hearts of many, a spark that promised accountability over entrenched corruption. As the investigation's findings were consolidated into a final report, whispers of a historic reckoning spread far beyond the confines of courtroom 3B. The city braced itself for the imminent collapse of a legacy built on prejudice, and Jasmine stood at the helm, a quiet force of resistance, ready to see justice not only restored but celebrated. The investigation was nearing its apex. The resonance of its revelations would soon shake the very foundations of the Dallas judiciary, and in that moment, hope for a fairer tomorrow burned brighter than ever. In the wake of the final investigation report, the full force of justice descended upon Judge Hayes. Federal prosecutors, bolstered by the damning evidence and the overwhelming public outcry, brought formal charges against him for corruption and civil rights violations. Within days, the Dallas Judicial Review Board convened an emergency session. In a penalty that sent shockwaves throughout the city, Judge Hayes was officially suspended pending his trial, and his judicial license was revoked as the board unanimously condemned his systematic abuses. His once feared name would soon vanish from headlines, replaced by a legacy of scandal and disgrace. As news of Judge Hayes' downfall rippled through Dallas, the municipal courthouse, once a scene of oppressive authority, became an emblem of reclaimed integrity. Across the city, community centers, legal aid clinics, and grassroots organizations celebrated the success of justice, a truth reinforced by the courageous stand of one determined woman. Jasmin Kroket, having dared to confront a deeply entrenched system, emerged as a beacon of hope. Her unwavering commitment to justice ignited a movement that would ultimately rally support for those long denied their rights. Local media outlets, now buzzing with the story of a legal genius who toppled a corrupt system, heralded Jasmine as a modern-day champion. Headlines screamed, "Jasmin Kroket, the legal maverick who broke the system," and "From contempt to triumph. How one attorney restored faith in Dallas." David Lane's footage of the courtroom showdown, overlaid with the bitter testimony and irrefutable evidence, went viral, and nightly news broadcasts featured expert panels discussing the systemic changes now on the horizon. Social media exploded with hashtags, #JusticeForDallas, #KroketForReform, #BreakingBias, that trended for days, uniting communities in a shared call for reinvention and accountability. In the months that followed, sweeping reforms quickly took shape within the Dallas judicial system. New policies were implemented to monitor fines, ensuring equitable treatment for all defendants regardless of race or background. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, stepped in to support the victims of discriminatory evictions in South Dallas, providing resources and legal assistance where it had long been lacking. For many residents, Jasmine's fight had transformed from a personal crusade into a citywide awakening, a clarion call against injustice that led to tangible change. On a crisp spring morning, as sunlight filtered through the restored halls of the municipal courthouse, Jasmine returned to court for a symbolic hearing. In that moment, every detail, from the polished marble floors and the clear, resonant chime of the newly installed clock to the respectful, hopeful murmurs of the gathered public, spoke of renewal. Jasmine's presence radiated a quiet confidence. Her eyes, steeled by years of struggle, now shone with the light of vindication. She delivered a concise, impassioned statement affirming that while one corrupt judge had been removed, the real victory lay in reestablishing trust in the system. A trust that would be rebuilt on transparency, fairness, and accountability. In the charged aftermath of the proceedings, as reporters clustered and microphones captured every word, Jasmine took one last moment to reflect. Standing in front of a backdrop emblazoned with the city's crest, she could almost hear the distant echoes of every wrong that had been righted. Then, with a small, resolute smile, she addressed the crowd. Today, it is not merely about one man's fall. It is about our collective rise. Justice, when wielded with truth and empathy, can transform even the darkest corners of our society. The crowd erupted into applause, a fervent, cathartic outpouring that swept through Dallas like a tidal wave of renewal. Outside the courthouse, as the city buzzed with renewed vigor, neighbors, activists, and ordinary citizens gathered in cafes and on street corners, discussing how justice had prevailed and how the actions of one empowered attorney had kindled change. In every conversation, on every screen, Jasmin Kroket's fearless stand against corruption resonated as a symbol of hope and possibility. The fall of Judge Hayes, once a pillar of judicial tyranny, had paved the way for a new era, one where accountability reigned supreme and every voice, especially those silenced by prejudice, found a place in the halls of justice. And so, as the sun set over Dallas, casting a golden glow on the renewed courthouse and the hopeful faces of its citizens, Jasmine walked away into the twilight. Her silhouette, framed by the fading light, was a powerful reminder that when truth rises, it can dismantle even the most entrenched injustice. Dallas would long remember the day when a corrupt judge was toppled and a true heroine emerged, forever altering the landscape of justice in the city. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.